been all over it. So I've been to Nigeria a few times. I've been to Kenya, Ethiopia, Palestine. I lived in Istanbul for a while. I lived in Bulgaria, all of what used to be Eastern Europe, which is now Central Europe. Latin America, Iceland. When I went to Iceland, because it turned out in those different, it was like in 2009 or something like that, and Icelandic Air was the cheapest way to go to Europe, and I had got hired to speak at this thing called the Food Fight at Northampton University in Northampton, England. So I thought I would like get other, if you're going to go across the Atlantic, you might as well get other lectures. So I decided to, you didn't need a visa, and there's no penalty for as long as you stayed in Iceland if you went Icelandic Air. So I went there and hung out with Shoot Up Bombs. And so they're telling me that, so that was really interesting because they took this flyer, the backside of this flyer, and they hand wrote it with a Sharpie very carefully on a tripod, like something like that. And then they'd have the flyers in a suitcase, because in Iceland, you're wearing gloves, so the last thing you really want to do is get, so you get a flyer. So they're telling me, so yeah, this is where the, we serve food every week at this corner, and then one week we were talking about how horrible the economy was and what the scandals were with the government. And then the next week we were talking about it again. People thought, well, we should march on the Parliament building, which was about 2 blocks away, 3 blocks away. And then they just kept marching there, and it got bigger and bigger. And then eventually some of the Food Not Bombs kids, there's like a 7-Eleven of Iceland, their logo is a pink pig on a blue background. And so they stole the flag off of one of the corner stores. And they climbed up on the Parliament building, and they took down the Icelandic flag, and they put on the pink flag. And what's that movie, Thrive, right? The very original movie of Thrive has the videos of the Food Not Bombs kids climbing to the top of the Parliament building, taking down the Icelandic flag and putting up the... And so then when the local media was like, what do you think about Food Not Bombs inspiring an uprising to overthrow the Icelandic government? And they're like, wow, really? Okay, that sounds good.
Saturday is a good place to start.
Yeah, I should start one. And then the book is everything you need to know about starting one. And then there's just the other flyer, 7 steps to starting Food Not Bombs. It tells you how to do it. And then if you get the one with the big logo that's below the color one, and you cut the tags and put them all in all the bookstores and laundromats and stuff, you'll get a lot of people starting it.
Okay.
And then if you went to posted the campuses in the fall before you came back up here,
then keep it going.
Keep it going while you're up here. Yeah. And then I spoke at Pritzker a lot over the years. I have a really good friend that does anarchist studies, the professor of anarchist studies at Pritzker.
Where's Pritzker?
Pritzker's in Claremont. It's part of the 5 College.
Yeah.
But this is pretty much just a project to kind of start a bit of a community outreach program here at UCSC through the SUA. My goal is to kind of try and make the issues that like a lot of the students face, which are kind of the same as a lot of what you guys face, which is in particular housing. It's kind of an issue which affects us all. So if we can, and then kind of center it around climate change. And so if we can create something in the SUA, we're trying to build some sort of a coalition within the SUA with Kayla. She's going to put some exit documents in her papers, which will hopefully make it easier for us to do that. And this is kind of for Keith to get his message out a little more, and hopefully we can spread it. It's nice to see a face I don't know. Yeah, just kind of getting a little more attention towards the things in our town which aren't quite right in many ways. I'm sure Keith is going to talk a lot about it, but there's different kind of laws in Santa Cruz which really affect the homeless and housing and kind of working against that. Like now there's a petition that's going around which is against a large vehicle ordinance, with something like that, where they essentially don't let you sleep in a parked car, which affects a lot of the homeless around here.
Even students.
Yeah, and students especially, and again, it's the housing thing. So hopefully with this, it's a foot in the door to kind of a longer relationship with Food Not Bombs, and us kind of creating a coalition within SUA and also with other communities and organizations, because I know Keith has a lot of connections, a lot of stories, a lot of people. So anyway, yeah, Keith, please kind of let.
Cool. Okay. So thanks for coming. So I'm old now, but I was actually young, and I went to college at Boston University, and I was studying painting and sculpture. And I was, I was like in my like 19, 20, and I was working at maybe 21, working in produce. And I felt horrible throwing away produce, so I started taking it to public housing. But there was a public housing project a few blocks from where the grocery store I was working at in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So I was going to Boston University in the afternoon studying painting. And I took academic class, like for instance American history, with a person by the name of Howard Zinn, who wrote a pretty famous book called The People's History of the United States. And I became friends with his, but as well as taking his class, and he wrote the foreword to at least that book. And I say that because you could be, you're at a perfect age to start a global movement. To do something that changes the world, it's definitely a cool thing. But at that time, Howard Zinn. So first of all, I'm taking food over to public housing projects, and the people in the projects were like so grateful to get wilted vegetables and bruised fruit and everything, and they'd be all excited about that. And it just seemed kind of and then one day they're telling me, look across this, they tell me about their plumbing didn't work, electricity didn't work, housing authority didn't help them out about anything. But they're still really happy to get my produce, and little children would play around me and everything. And then one day they say, look across the street, they just built this giant glass building where they're designing nuclear weapons. And that's where I got the idea for the name Food Not Bombs, because I just thought it was so tragic. People were suffering on one side of the street, and basically it's almost just as close as the bike co-op, they're building nuclear weapons from a place where people were struggling to survive. And then also Howard Zinn inspired me to go to a protest at Seabrook Nuclear Power Station. That's back when there was problems with nuclear power. There was Chernobyl, and there was a meltdown in 3 Mile Islands, and so it was like there was a lot of controversy, and we were trying to stop the building of a nuclear power station on the coast of New Hampshire in the town of Seabrook. And there had been an ongoing protest there from probably even the beginning of the 70s. And so Howard Zinn had been arrested at one of the protests, and I think you were in jail at Diablo Canyon at the same time Howard was in jail in the armory in New Hampshire. So I started going to those protests, and on May 24th, 1980, my friend, who was a law student at Boston University, Brian Feigenbaum, got arrested for felony assault of a police officer. And essentially what happened was he was our media spokesperson, so they knew his name. And because we all looked exactly the same, because we all had long hair and beards, if you were a man, they arrested him as the token person to arrest, and his bail was very high. So we found actually a wealthy person that evening who had put up the bail and freed him. So we were talking on the way back to Boston once we got him out about how we should be a collective, we should be our own group, we should start working just together as the 8 of us, and we need to raise money to pay the guy back, so we're going to do bake sales. And as it turned out, we also had a little company called Smooth Move to make money, and we're moving this family who had a poster that said, wouldn't it be a beautiful day if the schools had all the money they needed and the Air Force had to hold a bake sale to buy a bomber. So we decided to go to the Army Navy surplus store in Central Square, Cambridge, buy some military uniforms, go out with our sign and our baked goods, and tell people that in Harvard Square or at the Boston BU Student Union or whatever, that we're trying to buy a bomber and please help us out, buy our cookies and so on. And people thought that was really funny and they would talk to us, but even though, and it didn't really help us make more money, but we realized it was a great way to get people walking by to discuss the Seabrook Nuclear Power Station and nuclear arms race and those kind of things by having kind of a street theater. So that gave us we had realized that probably one of the biggest issues surrounding the building of Seabrook Nuclear Power Station was its profitability, its connection to the economic interests of the powerful in New England. And so we thought, well, why don't we set up a soup line outside the stockholders meeting of the Bank of Boston, which was going to be held on March 26, 1981, outside in the Federal Reserve Bank. And so, there had been like a lot of discussion. The election had just, Reagan had won the election in November, and he had just gotten inaugurated in January. And he was running on this idea that he was going to adopt the neoliberal structural adjustment, is what they were calling it, or trickle-down economics, or Reaganomics as it became called, or the Chicago School of Economics, with the same kind of economic policies that were forced on Chile after the U.S. coup of Pinochet in September 11, 1972, or 73 maybe. So anyway, so people were like, oh, well, basically what that was going to mean was that Reagan was proposing to cut social services, cut housing, the public housing that did exist, just not continue to build it or to pay for it, and therefore there become less public housing, and that there would be less job support and there'd be those kinds of things. And the money instead, the savings from not spending on social services, would go to funding the military, in particular Star Wars and the MX missile program, which never happened. Star Wars is actually still happening. And that big transfer would impoverish the people of the United States. So to make a point, we thought we would dress up like hobos, the way we had been dressing up like soldiers to do our bake sales. We would dress up like hobos, and we'd have a soup line outside the stockholders meeting, and we would try to get people to be shocked at, oh my God, Reagan is, there'll be a future of people having to stand in line to eat at soup kitchens. And so when we were making all the food the night before, we realized we had not done enough outreach to have all of our friends dressed like hobos and stand in line and look like a line of homeless people from the Great Depression. And so we thought, well, we better figure out something. So I went to the local shelter, which is called the Pine Street Inn, and I gave a little speech at midnight to the guys sitting around on in those days they didn't have beds at the shelters. You just sat on tile benches and on the floor. And they were like, after I gave my speech about why we're going to do this protest and everything, they're like, oh, this is cool, a protest like the 60s, that's really great, and they were all, the people that were still awake and paying attention or lucid enough to know what was happening were like, well, this is really cool. So we went down there and we set up, and sure enough, there was only 8 of us, so we 4 people would be a soup line and 4 people would be a serving, so it would have had no impact whatsoever. But about 30, 40 people showed up. And so we stood handing them the food, and each one of the people would like go, God bless you. They were so thankful. It was unbelievable. It was like so touching. And then I remember this one young businessman come by, and he goes, oh my goodness, Reagan's only been in office like 30 days and there's already soup lines in America. What we were imagining would happen is already happening. He was like really upset, and so we realized this did have an impact. But the interesting thing was the people in line were like, and then some of the stockholders would flip us off and yell at us. Some of the stockholders would say, yeah, this bank is really horrible. And so the board of directors of the Bank of Boston, which we were protesting, were the chairman of the board of Raytheon Missile Systems, Lockheed Martin, Digital Electronics, all these like military contractors basically, and they were also building this nuclear power station. So, so some of the stockholders were angry that they were doing that. Others thought it was great they were making all this profit, and supported them. And then Richard Hill, who was the president at that time, became the president of the World Bank right afterwards. So anyway, the guys that were in line and the one woman who came to eat said, there's no food for homeless people in Boston. You should do this every day. So that night, when we were at home washing the pots and pans and stuff, we decided we'd all quit our jobs and do nothing but feed people on the streets and do street theater. And so we set up a whole pattern where we collect food that couldn't be sold from all the grocery stores we could go to and the bakeries and so on. And then we would deliver a bunch of that food in the middle of the day to housing projects. And then in the afternoon, we would do street theater with vegan meals in Harvard Square, the Boston Commons, or other parts of the Boston area. And that became really the beginning of Food Not Bombs. So our roots were in the idea of economics and the intentional decisions by corporate leaders to invest in what profited them at the expense of the general population. So then that's basically what we were just this one collective that kind of, you know, in Boston, and we protest the war in El Salvador, we protest nuclear power, nuclear war, the Contras in Nicaragua. We supported people that were in the uprising in Iran, things like that. Tried to stop, we protested the genocide in East Timor. And we also worked in local efforts to stop redlining, which is when the banks will draw a line on a map and say we will not invest in this section of the city, so that that part of the city will get really poor, and then the same bankers will come in and buy it up really cheap, and then it'll become condominiums. And in your life here in Santa Cruz, you've seen that already with what's going on downtown. And so when, in 1981, there weren't like homeless camps. I'm sure it must be amazing to be alive today and to think there was a time in America where there was really virtually no homeless people, and it was not considered an issue or a problem or anything, just, and so, after 42 years of doing Food Not Bombs, it's really clear that the reason that it's not because everybody thought, wow, I think I'd love to stop living in an apartment and move into a tent and do heroin. That sounds great. Like millions of Americans have made that decision. Obviously that is not true. But you get this kind of mystique that's really, the economy's great, it's just these people are lazy and that's why they live on the streets. But obviously you wouldn't have gone from almost no homeless people to millions of homeless people just because it became so popular to be homeless and it was like all the rage. So anyway, eventually I moved to San Francisco and I started a second Food Not Bombs, and that's when we got arrested for feeding the hungry on August 15th, 1988. And people were outraged about that, so what they would they'd call us and say they wanted to start a Food Not Bombs themselves to protest the fact that we were being arrested in San Francisco. And that's when I wrote this flyer called 7 Steps to Starting Food Not Bombs. And would mail that to people so they could start their own chapters. On August 29th of that year, it turned out that the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force declared Food Not Bombs to be a credible national security threat, even though there was, at that moment, like 8 kids doing Food Not Bombs in Boston. 10 of us in San Francisco, and then another 10 down in Long Beach, California, and that was the, to be like less than like 40, 50 people, a national security threat by handing out free vegan meals to homeless people once a week. It doesn't even really, but we didn't learn we were that kind of a threat until recently. So anyway, so we also, we eventually ended up getting arrested over 1,000 times in San Francisco for feeding people. And then other cities, they started arresting people like in Tampa, Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, down in LA, Arcata, California. And every time there was waves of arrest, there'd be more and more people wanting to start chapters. So eventually they became, now we're like in 1,000 cities and 65 countries. Also at that time, I ended up traveling, starting to do, well, eventually I faced life in prison and so on, and I had to stay out of San Francisco after I settled my case, and I started doing a lot of tours. But even before that, I did a tour of Europe, and that's when I first got involved with anti-globalization activists that were trying to stop the European Union and the euro. And at that time, there was labor, environmentalists, and human rights activists had united in Bonn, West Virginia, because the capital hadn't moved yet to Berlin. And we're trying to stop that, saying that it would be like a devastating to the economy, to working people, to the environment, and to human rights if a single currency, European currency was developed and there was the EU. And then so that was my first anti-globalization protest I started going to. Sure enough, at another time, I'm over in Europe right when the switch had happened, and I was in Italy, and they would have the price in lira and the price in the euro, and they rounded up all the expenses for the public up to the nearest euro. All the wages were lowered to the nearest euro. So this was it was becoming clear there was like this economic stranglehold that was happening. There's also over here you had the North American Free Trade Agreement, which we were organizing against. And I remember we started a bunch of pirate radio stations in the early 90s, and I received back in the day you got this thing called Gopher that would get your email and bring it to you. And I got this like message from the Zapatistas in Chiapas, Mexico. It was like, we're doing an uprising today against the North American Free Trade Agreement and standing for the working people of the world. And so I read that over our radio station on January 1st, 1991. And then I was out in front of City Hall with a big sign saying Viva Zapatista, no NAFTA, and that's when my first strike arrest happened, and ended up eventually facing 25 to life, and settled the case in the end, but getting credit for 500 days in jail, and I got to write my own probation, so I couldn't get violated, but I still stayed out of town. And then I participated in a lot of protests against the North American Free Trade Agreement. Now we have people in Mexico, Food Not Bombs groups that are protesting from down there. We have Food Not Bombs groups in Canada protesting NAFTA from that perspective. And then eventually, and then I started organizing against the World Trade Organization. So the first thing that when I was over in Europe, I met these people who had a movie called 50 Years is Enough. And it was about the Brentwood Convention and how there was this plan to ultimately have one global economic system with a centralized economic leadership, and that was their vision that they had, and they were building it by bits, like NAFTA, like the euro, those kind of things like that. And so I went over to so first I organized a tour with 3 anti-globalization activists from Spain called the Unfree Trade Tour. We went to 60 cities in the US and in Canada, advocating that if the World Trade Organization ever had a summit in North America, that we'd all go there and shut it down. That was in 1997. A year later, they announced it would be in Seattle, and then we organized a huge protest there where we shut down their summit. And people kind of mostly know of that protest because there were people broke out the windows at Starbucks and Nike. But the reality, what was most powerful was this campaign that we organized called Direct Action Network, DAN. And we actually physically shut down the convention center and made it impossible for the people that were wanting to advocate this new world order to meet, and frustrated them. And actually it's probably why FBI infiltrators encouraged people to break the windows at Nike and at Starbucks to take to try to make it so that the power of citizens interfering directly with the business of corporate power and of these people trying to create this one world economic system, that we would be maligned and that everybody would think that the solution to this was breaking out windows and not actually just physically putting your body nonviolently in front of them so they could not get to the meetings. And they used riot police and everything to try to clear the streets and stuff. So there became a series of those events that Food Not Bombs was super organized in and participated in Genoa and down in Mexico and up in Sweden and so on. And there was this long effort to try to slow this advancing globalization of the economy. And it worked often. For instance, the summit in Cancun, they never came to an agreement on. It was supposed to be on agricultural tariffs and all this kind of centralizing agriculture globally, but the African delegation and so on blocked it, and they couldn't go forward. And then being like having no resources, I used to swim in the swimming pool with the African delegation because I was like living with other activists in an abandoned building and stuff. And that was a good way to get a shower. So we talked with them, and they were like, "Oh, this is so cool! You guys are out on the streets blocking everything and like making such a huge scene. That's really helping us because we can keep sailing. Everybody, look at the public hates what we're doing. We're going to work against it." And it was like we became like really good friends with all the African delegates in the pool. We're all like swimming around talking about the summit and stuff. It was really cool. So anyway, that's when you start to talk about homelessness and poverty, it's intentional. It's not, there's this whole idea of making it out that it's individual failing. So the whole 42 years technically that I've been doing Food Not Bombs, the big thing was, at the beginning, was if you just prayed to God correctly and you were one with God, you wouldn't be homeless. That was the message from like the 80s, and so on. And then it just becomes, well, you're lazy, a drug addict, or alcoholic, or whatever. That's why you're homeless, and so on. Trying to deflect attention from the fact that there's economic policies that actually intentionally cause massive disruption in our society. And so you keep seeing more and more people ending up on the street. So in Santa Cruz in '88, I was coming to city council meetings saying, like, look we should probably start building like single room occupancy hotels and things like that because the homeless population is going to likely get larger and larger and larger. We should plan ahead. Well, real estate interests were not interested in that. The banks were not interested in that, and so on. So that never happened, right? They just are starting the very first one of those buildings now on Coral Street. Since it took from '88 to, and they haven't even broken ground yet. They're just finally talking about having 100 units out of all those years. When they had billions of dollars they could have spent doing it all along. But they made the choice to not house people and to let them move to the streets. And then once the pandemic happened, that really opened the door for this final, huge, giant, well, let's hope it's a final, grab of power. So, in the name of the pandemic, there was the CARES Act. I don't know, anybody here remember the CARES Act? So that's the largest transfer of wealth to the rich ever in world history. Trillions and trillions of dollars. And then we got what, $2,000 from Trump, while Vanguard and State Street and BlackRock and Blackstone got hundreds of billions of dollars. Well, they already were super rich by then, but now, you know, Raytheon and all them made all this money off the Afghanistan war, off of the Iraq war, off of bombing Yemen for years and years, off of arming the Israeli Defense Forces against the Palestinians. You know, all these corporations just are making greater and greater power grabs, and that's hence the food, not bombs. We need food and housing and resources for the people in the community, but our money and resources are being transferred to uber-rich oligarchs globally. You know, and it's not just America, but it's everywhere that this is happening. And so then with the transfer of wealth from the pandemic, one of the things that was already in the works but that became like, you know, rushed is that all this, like in our town, luxury condominium projects. So where West just was as we were serving food at what was called Lot 27 for a long. So when the pandemic happened, let's go back a bit. So when the pandemic happened, all the soup kitchens shut down everywhere. Not only just in Santa Cruz, but everywhere. Any meals indoors for quarantine purposes shut down. So we thought, well, it's going to be like a month of this quarantine. We'll serve every day, and then the soup kitchens will open. That'll be great. Well, that didn't happen. It's like 810 days later, and the soup kitchens are still closed, and we're still sharing food every day. And if it wasn't for us, there would be hundreds and hundreds of people that would have gone hungry through the entire pandemic, and who knows what would have happened with the rage. I mean, imagine you haven't eaten 5 days, there's no possible way to get food. What are you going to do? You might start, there's those huge lines at Trader Joe's. Were you going to wait in line to shoplift some food in there just to eat? Or are you going to just rush the door and take the food? You know, that's what the city, and that was what was going, that was not just limited to Santa Cruz, that was globally, that potentially could be a problem. So food up bombs all over the world was often the main food for people living outside or marginalized people that had housing but had no way to get food. They were depending on us. So I remember beautiful photos of the groups in Philippines, like dozens and dozens of kids with bicycles, with bags and bags of boxes with silkscreen of logo Food Not Bombs on them and stuff. And so it was clear that this economic system had no interest in the people. They look at all the businesses that went under on Pacific Avenue. It's like, there's paper in every window practically. There's like a third of the businesses are closed. And millions of, the highest number of people to lose their businesses was the African American community, like just been devastated by the lockdowns. At the same time, we could all go to Costco, but we couldn't shop and eat in our local stores. That added another devastation to the community. And so it became more and more clear that part of what was going on with either whether the pandemic, they were taking advantage of the pandemic, or they had already planned it, or whatever the situation, the uber rich got a lot richer, we got a lot poorer, and they started to institute much more severe clampdown in the country. Yeah.
I just wanted to we're almost to the end of our time.
Oh, okay.
Sadly, yeah. I wanted to leave a few minutes for questions and kind of how to get involved.
Yeah, okay.
If you just want to I know you've got like hours of it left,
okay.
But just kind of wrap up in 2 to 5 minutes, and then.
Okay, cool. I can do that. So anyway, so during this pandemic, it's been important for us to get more and more volunteers, because we have to do it every single day, and the logistics is insane. And so, but right now, I think we're at the most important pivotal point where we're facing the greatest human rights crisis ever in my life, and I'm only like 65, probably in the memory of anybody, because there is an effort to completely take over every aspect of our life through social control, through digital IDs, through, under the guise of the pandemic. So we share food we need your assistance as volunteers to come to to help us out, and we serve every day at the town clock from noon until 3. And we cook it up in Scotts Valley at 100 Enterprise Way. You can get the information on the flyers. And we are organizing specifically to try to defend ourselves against this horrible takeover by corporate power, create a corporate dystopia. And the political power of Food Not Bombs is the fact that every time we don't seek permission, we don't ask permission, we just do it. And so there is basically a community of people in the world which have left the social control of the corporations and the governments and are now working outside of that to create our own reality in our own world, and that's what Food Not Bombs is a part of. And we really encourage you to participate in that. And we have a flyer here on resisting, and it has like all kinds of resources on the back that you can check out. So a bunch of those websites are actually people I'm either personal friends of, or they're friends of mine. And I think it's very, very important to start uniting as citizens to try to work together and to defeat this kind of social control. So, does anybody have any questions? I guess I didn't realize I was speaking so long and we were so late. Yes?
Yeah, so like in Santa Cruz, you talked about the 12 thing at the town clock, right? And that's where you provide food and things like that. Is there like for like material things like socks and stuff like that, is that also a part of what you're trying to do, or is it more like, food is the immediate concern, so you're trying to do everything you can do about that?
Well, the thing is that we do actually hand out tents every day. So the pattern, and we also have out clothing at the town clock every day. So one of the things that you may have heard of is that people will, the city tickets the people that live in cars. And now with the large vehicle ordinance that just happened, it's illegal to live in your RV, and they're going to seize your RVs. And so those people, when they lose their cars, end up coming to Food Not Bombs, and they often ask us, is there the shelter? We need to go to the shelter. And we have to explain, we call the shelters, but there's never any space at the shelters. So then we hand them a tent, and we help them find a place on the benchlands to live. That's the pattern, and we've been doing that for the whole 800 days of the pandemic. It's outrageous that during the pandemic they would be stealing your vehicles just because you're unhoused. And what they'll do is they'll give you 5, 6, 7 tickets at a time until, in a 24-hour period of time, until you can't pay your tickets and you can't register your vehicle, and then you're unregistered vehicle, and then they take your car. And it's heartbreaking that it's like all the time that happens. So we need every kind of resource. If you're an auto mechanic, we need help fixing cars to keep them going from place to place so they don't get ticketed. I mean, we buy batteries, we buy starters, we buy parts for cars just to keep them going. We buy, so we need everything like that, particularly tents. Yes?
I came a little bit late, so I don't know if you already talked about this, but for us to volunteer, do we just show up? How do we...
You could just show up, or you could email me on the Enjoy flyer, just email me and say volunteer in the subject, and then I'll email you back the details of when and where we serve food and everything, which is also on the flyer. But then also I will CC Mac, who is our volunteer coordinator. And then we need drivers really bad for the Food Not Bombs van. That's one of our things. I think we just lost our Thursday bottom liner cook, but we need cooks on all the time. we cook every day at 100 Enterprise Way, which is at Scotch Valley off of exit 5, Granite Creek Road. It's where Santa's Village used to be, on Santa's Village Road. And that's every day but Tuesday and Friday. And then we need people to pick up, materials and things like that, and just actually hand out the food, set up, break down the equipment. Yeah.
We are living in a really kind of interesting, difficult time, and I think we've all experienced it. And you are in one of the most difficult occupations, I would say, in today. You're seeing things which people actively avoid all the time. And so, and I notice, I've spent some time with you now, and I see that you're an extremely positive and kind person. And I kind of wanted to ask, what is your secret to maintaining positivity in times where it's difficult to do so?
Well, I think the big thing is so the people on the streets are my family, for instance. I know, I don't know, I don't feel any separation at all between me and anybody at all, so whether you're housed or unhoused or anything. And so I think that the beauty of connecting with everybody is, I think that really helps me a lot, stay positive. So even the most beaten down individuals that are suffering the worst have this dignity and pride that's just so beautiful. And just to recognize them and be with people at their, with them, it's just a wonderful thing. So that's part of it. Do you have any ideas, Kathleen?
I'm Keith's girlfriend, so I think he was just born positive. And he's also born high energy. He's up like at 4 or 5 every morning working on and communicating with all his groups around. He's amazing.
Part of it, there's also this flyer, Normalizing Nuclear War and Predicting Global Food Shortages, a very popular title, does talk a little bit about the influence of watching my grandfather advocate for a nuclear attack on Hanoi during the Vietnam War. And by contrast, my other grandfather being connected to the ancient Hopi community, and that seeing both of these, it's like a polar opposites of visions of the world. So that I think played an important part. Yes.
Yeah, what advice would you give to young activists who are fearful of retaliation from institutions, and what advice would you give or best tips for fighting them back?
Wow. Well, now when I was younger, college age, the retaliation by the state was much less severe than it could, because there was not the technology that we have now. So, wow. But one thing I would say, so from the perspective of a person that was once 20 and is now not, whatever the organizing of it, I remember when I was 20, I thought the next protest would be the protest that would fundamentally change everything. And I'd be so into it, and I'd stay up all night gluing posters all over Boston and stuff, thinking if we just got 1 million people out there this week, that would do it. But as it turns out, it's that constantly doing something not burning out, realizing at this point in your life you have another 50 years of organizing ahead of you. So to take care of yourself somewhat so that you can do it for 50 years. Because that's the most important thing is flowing with the way the society is moving and changing, but knowing that it's long term. So I think that's one thing. Now there's stuff I would have potentially. So for instance, if you are in a situation, it depends on what the risk is to you. So for instance, getting a lot of criminal cases going and stuff, that can burn you right out, but it can also be necessary. And to survive that is to have something that, and I have that in both of these books, The Hungry for Peace and Annika's Cookbook, is creating what we were calling affinity groups, which people might call teams, or there's all kinds of names for it, where you have a group of people you totally trust that's relatively small, of maybe like 6 to 10 people, 15, 20 people, and that some of you are not going to go do whatever it's risky that will cause you to potentially go to jail, and the others know that they will potentially go to jail, and have it in advance how you're going to, deal with that. Maybe predetermine how you can do bail. Bail now is real weird. You can do it online, and it's kind of strange. I have a whole little system. I bail a lot of people out, and I have this whole little weird system of that. But that to pre-design that in advance, and I think probably the biggest thing is to whatever you do it from your heart, with integrity, and be willing to be on. If you're on the stand in a court case and you did X, Y, Z, before you did X, Y, Z, know that when you're in the stand, you're going to say, yes, I did X, Y, Z because of this, and I feel, that was the right thing to do. And having that kind of integrity and is in what your actions are. So you don't want to do like something where you get caught and you feel bad that you did it, and then you plead out because you were embarrassed that you did the thing. You just don't want to, even if at the moment, that's hard too, you could see like some really demented thing happen, and then you want to react to it, and then your reaction to it might not have been the most thought out thing, and then you're kind of like, once you're in court or something, you're like, ugh. So that I think is really important. So it's not, you might face life in prison, but like when I faced life in prison, I was like, I did not do a crime. I was happy to say exactly what happened, and I was also happy to understand that the reason they were bringing riot police into the courtroom every time I made a court appearance was to intimidate the jury and intimidate the community into thinking somehow I was a violent, terrible person. But I could just stand there and go, I'm not a violent, terrible person. I actually do not hit people. I do not shoot people. I do not do any of those things. I'm not promoting those things. So sure, I might be convicted of assault, battery, and strong arm robbery, but there's no way I'm going to assault, batter, and strong arm robbery somebody. So that's, I think, is really the important thing, is that. So think out what your actions are going to be, maybe the consequences could be that you're getting felony charges for whatever it is you're doing, and be prepared for that. But set up a huge structure before that happens, including publicity, social media, media contacts, lawyers, people that are going to take care of your scene, like make sure your apartment's going to be paid for, your animals are going to be fed, all those things, so you're not in jail going, oh crap, my dog is locked in my apartment and is probably going crazy, So I think those are some of the things. Is there any more questions before we? Who's going to kick us out?
Nobody, but I don't want to go over time on the room. I don't want to use any more time. But any more questions for Keith?
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on starting a food not bombs?
So to start a food not bombs, quickly, the thing to do is first is to hold a meeting, like try to get a bunch of people together in your community to talk, and then and then I have the sample agenda of an early meeting on the back of this. And so then you want to be trying to figure out where your food sources are, set up a really regular pattern of picking up that food, and then I suggest you take the food before you start cooking and serving on the street necessarily to the other food programs that already exist, if they exist. Now post-pandemic, that may not be happening, but that typically is what would happen. And then through that you would make, it's sort of like intelligence gathering too. You're making allies of the other food programs that are feeling less threatened about you, and then the next thing you're going to get a sense of when like say maybe somebody has like the greatest meal every Thursday at their soup kitchen. Well, you might not want to be competing, so to speak, on Thursdays. Maybe the worst meal at a soup kitchen is a Saturday or whatever, or maybe the only time you can do it is a Saturday, but you'll learn things like that, and and then the other thing is you want to choose a location of sharing food that sort of like what we're doing at the town clock, where a lot of people will see you. It's easy for people of all classes to come by and get the food and know that you're there, and then have this regular pattern. And so at the very beginning, it may be a month or two, very few people come to eat at your place, but don't get discouraged, because it takes time for people to realize, oh, there's always a free meal on Saturday at XYZ location. And so you might still be taking the surplus food to the other programs, but you'll be taking what you need to make your meal and hand it out. And then also it's good to make like social media, like, make your MySpace. No, I don't think people do that anymore. You might have typically a lot of Food Not Bombs chapters have a Food Not Bombs, San Bernardino Food Not Bombs Facebook page, have San Bernardino Food Not Bombs, Instagram and a TikTok account. I don't even know what exists anymore. Whatever the things are, and then that way, then you would contact us, and we try to get it on our map so people would find you. You would also put up flyers around your community. Often the very first thing after you get a Facebook page is maybe make an events page for their founding meeting, that kind of thing, and Instagram announcing the founding meeting and stuff like that. And because you don't want to just do it on your own. You really need, even if you only get 3 or 4 people though, that's enough to really get it going. And then just, that's what I would do. Yeah.
And this email is also, if we want to find out about in our hometowns over the summer, the same.
Yeah, you can email me at foodnotbombs.net, and then also at foodnot, or at keith@foodnotbombs.net, or whatever all the other ones are. But if you go to the Food Not Bombs website, there's a Google map, and which is the first image. That's kind of a dead thing. It's just an image. You can go to locations. There's an interactive Google map, which we're always struggling to deal with. We also have a global signal, which is called Carrot something. I would have to look it up. But we're trying to really get our global contact thing together. We also have the global Zoom meetings, where it's kind of cool because you meet people from all over the world on Zoom. Any more questions? And I hope you come down. It is so much fun. I don't know if you have any other fellow students. There's a lot of students that work with Food Not Bombs every day. So, in fact, there's a substantial number of the core members are actually students from out here.
Thank you, Keith.
Thanks.
So obviously, hopefully, I'm going to be taking a bunch of these, and then I'll be kind of distributing them around campus and places. This is kind of just an info session, and then for anyone who wants to come, most of you already know about it, but we're going to be doing something at our house, where we're just going to, Keith was gracious enough to provide us with a lot of peanut butter and jam and bread and a lot. So we're going to be making hopefully 200, 300 plus sandwiches tomorrow. For anyone who's interested, that'd be great. We'll be meeting at around 10 o'clock at our apartment. If people know where that is, I don't know if any of you guys have ever been there. We again live in such a fuck time, there's no other way to put it, and it really makes me happy that I kind of was looking at all y'all during the presentation, and you guys care, you do, and that is just like so beautiful to see, and it fills me with so much hope, because I have, a lot of you I have so much love for, and like knowing that the people that I care about are also willing and care about the same things that I do, because obviously this is a humanitarian issue. This is it's a legislative issue. It's a worldwide issue, but know, like Keith is, I mean, I admire you so much. You created something, like we have the founder of Food Not Bombs in front of us, you know, a worldwide organization, and he lives in Santa Cruz. I was just like, it's so fortunate for us that you live here, and so that's just awesome. And so, again, to another, you know, many years of Food Not Bombs, and to us creating and fostering a good relationship within SUA and UCSC and Santa Cruz and the community with Food Not Bombs and you know, houseless people and just people in general, and figuring out a way to better this world, you know. Yeah, but anyway, again, thank you, Keith.
One last thing I want to say is that you know, they're supposed to evict all the homeless people out of the bench lands by July 1st. So we don't really have a good strategy yet how to stop that, but we do have a signal group that I can hook you up with today, which we're going to send out the announcements if we need people to go and show up to protest that when we get the 3-day notice that they're all going to be gone, or we will have an event before July 1st to try to stop the evictions, but we haven't figured out a good strategy yet. We're probably going to also sue the city to block it, but we're still working on that as well. But last time when they were doing the evictions, the holiday evictions, all these students came down and we blocked the police from kicking everybody out, and that gave us enough time to file the lawsuit, and then the judge ruled that they couldn't kick them out, and then that's why we have that huge camp there now. Because when they kick them out, they're kicking them out into doorways and downtown to be arrested and harassed by the cops every single night. So we're trying to come up with a strategy. So I could hook you up with that signal if you're interested in that, or the global signal. I guess I could do that. If anybody here knows how to do that.
Yeah, I'm on the signal, and so Kayla and I are, and we have pretty
Cool,
much
cool,
everyone's
great.
info, so we can
Get the word out.
Yeah.
So yeah, just be aware that towards the end of June we're going to mobilize. City Council went back to Zoom and after 2 City Council meetings where the public could show up. Apparently they didn't like us showing up, so they went back to Zoom. So we're trying to figure out different strategies surrounding that are nonviolent ways of resisting this kind. Really, I mean, now I think it might be 500 people living in the bench lands. If they have less than 100 people are going to have a place to stay probably. And I just got news that they're kicking everybody out of the armory so they can put 60 other people in the armory. So 60 people are going to be on the streets, well, replaced by 60 other people. That is actually not solving the problem. Yay, everyone!
All right. Thank you,
Thank you, guys.